I think we all enjoy attending, being a part of a wedding ceremony. Sometimes we're invited as the guest. Sometimes we're participants in the wedding party. And certainly for the bride and the groom, it's a great day, but they also know it's a lot of work, a lot of preparation, a lot of things that need to be put into it, including time and organization, and today, a lot of money. And it wasn't maybe a lot different back in the days of Jesus, during the days of the betrothal, and that would be what we call the engagement. But then back then, the betrothal was also a part of vows and commitments that had already taken place, just the wedding day hadn't happened. And that's where we find ourselves in John chapter 2 during a wedding. And so I want to spend just a few minutes talking about this event and maybe talking it in a way that we don't always talk about it. Because there's something to this, and we're trying to figure out what it is that John, as he's writing this gospel about Jesus, is trying to show us. He's trying to illustrate something. He's trying to teach us some kind of a lesson. He's trying to encourage us in our faith that we may know Christ better. And so sometimes we scratch our heads and saying, I don't understand this. It seems like a pretty simple problem they had. I mean, it may be hard to fix, but it's not as big a deal as maybe somebody who's died, or somebody who's sick, or somebody who's got leprosy, or somebody who's demon-possessed. All these miracles that Jesus performed, it's kind of like, why this one? And I want to talk about why this one, and maybe that would be helpful as we look at this. So I actually did call it wedding wine, but I didn't quite have enough room, so this is kind of like Bugs Bunny, wet wine. All right, here we go. So it's red wine, but this really wedding wine. So it has to do with this miracle of turning water into wine. And what could possibly be the point? So there's a lot of questions I came up with this week that I want to share with you. And maybe we can develop some answers. So at the end of this gospel that John is writing, it says there, the very last verse, this is why I wrote it. So I would have put this maybe at the very beginning to say, this is why I wrote it. And when we're reading through it, we go, oh, that's why he's writing this. But anyway, Jesus did many other signs in the presence of the disciples, which are not written in this book, but these are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. So somebody out there who knows a lot more than I do, say that John, this gospel, was written well after the other three. So maybe John even had an opportunity to know what the other three said. So he's thinking, well, I'm not going to kind of repeat a lot of the things that they said. And John spends a lot more time not just talking about the miracles, but what do they mean? How does this apply? So you remember, for instance, Jesus, multiplied the loaves, feeding 5,000 men. Well, the other Gospels just kind of mention it like that's what happened, but then John gets into a lot of description, details. What does this mean, the bread? Well, Jesus is the bread of life, and Jesus is to be given to everybody, and Jesus is going to make that available. And so he spends a lot of time talking about spiritual bread, not just physical bread. So this is the kind of thing that John does as he's talking about these things. But here's the question. The word here is signs. Signs. Over and over again, John uses the word. They're not miracles. They kind of are. But he's saying they're not just miracles. They're signs. And so when we're reading John chapter 2, we have to say this is a sign. A sign is meant to point to something. It's not just there for a random purpose. It's not just there to say, well, look at this. Jesus did this. And we go, oh, wow, that's good. Let's move on. The sign, well, what's a sign for? Well, here we have a picture of a stop sign. And this is the same scripture we were at before. And so you may say, well, one day we're driving down the road, and my little child, is kind of thinking about, here we are driving, and what do you do with a stop sign? So he says, well, Dad, can you tell me about the stop sign? Can you explain it to me? And so I thought I'd be ready for that question, because I know what he's asking. He's asking about the stop sign. The stop sign is 0.08 inches thick, anodized aluminum. The anodized coating prevents the corrosion and stabilizes the aluminum for the best adhesion of reflective sheeting. The sign's blank is cut from the sheet of metal of aluminum or by a metal shear machine or a bandsaw. Corners are rounded and holes are mounted and punched or drilled. Applying a 3M reflective sheeting coating of an automated laminator applies 80 psi for a flawless adhesion. The sheeting is made up of tiny glass embedded beads in a flexible plastic surface, which allows light from the car headlights to be reflective off the indicator back to the driver. Application of the legend with white reflective sheeting. This is accompanied by the silk screening using a high-quality 3M ink. The stop image has been stenciled into the silk mesh to create a negative imaging. The finished sign is then placed in a drying rack, 12 to 24 hours for drying and curing. Any other questions, son? You think that's funny? How often do we do that with John chapter 2? There's a wedding and we say, what about the wedding? And it seems to me, usually, the only question we have is, was that alcoholic wine or non-alcoholic wine? Now, that could be a good question you can ask sometime. Maybe just ask somebody else. Because that's not the point. Surely that's not what John's trying to teach us. So what is John trying to teach us? Well, apparently, there's a sign. So you see the stop sign. You may think you know what the stop sign is for, but maybe somebody would need to explain it. What does it mean to stop? Sometimes we may do a rolling stop through the stop sign, and a police officer may say, that's not a stop. And so I'm going to give you a little piece of paper that you can fill out and mail in with another piece of paper you may have. Or you can do it electronically these days. What does stop mean? Well, I could say, well, when I come to that sign, I know exactly what it means. It means stop texting and driving. It means stop speeding. It means stop being a reckless driver. There's a lot of things you need to stop when you're driving. But that's not what this sign means, is it? So we have to understand when it says stop, what does that mean? Well, it means stop your vehicle at this place, because if you don't, that truck that's coming from the right is going to hurt you. So stop. So we know what stop means, but it's not always so obvious first time you ever saw the word stop. It could mean stop a lot of things while you're driving. So we look at John chapter 2 and say, well, what are we trying to learn here? What are we trying to say? What's really happening in John chapter 2? So let's go through it fairly slowly, verse by verse, see what happens. The problem I had, though, when I was looking at the Gospel of John, is there's only 8 signs. There's only 8 miracles that are mentioned in John. 8. To me, that's not a lot. It seems like the other gospel writers have a lot more signs. If John wanted to say, I'm going to give you all these signs and all these miracles so you would know that Jesus Christ is the Son of the living God, and by believing in him, you may have life in his name, and I'd say, I want more. But my bigger question is this. I want different ones. You think about it. He's only going to list 8. Why would he include this miracle at the wedding of turning water to wine? Evidently, he thinks it's important. He thinks there's something to this. He thinks there's something we need to see. I mean, he could have listed a lot more of maybe the demons being cast out and the blind seeing. There's a lot of other miracles Jesus did. But here are the 8. That's all I'm saying. I'm not even going to go through them. But those are the 8 that are listed in the Gospel of John. And the first one is turning water to wine. And so by the time we get to John chapter 2, we're going to begin with the end of the story, and we're going to end with the beginning of the story. Just kidding. But this is the end of this little section to help us understand what's going on. This is the first of the signs, Jesus' signs, the miracles. This is the first of the signs Jesus did. It was in Cana of Galilee and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him. So that's kind of one of the initial purposes. As we're kind of reading through this is going to be really hard to comprehend. Just before John chapter 2 is John chapter 1. Okay, so you got that one? So John chapter 1, John the Baptist is talking about the Messiah coming. John the Baptist baptizes Jesus, and we know that there's confirmation from the Father in heaven with the dove and the voice. Then John the Baptist, a little time later, sees Jesus and said, look, here he is, the Lamb of God who takes away sins of the world. And some of the people followed him. So at that point, you had Andrew, and you had Peter, and you had Nathaniel. So here are these people, there's 4 of them altogether, that were now kind of following Jesus. And so they want to know, what is this really all about? What's going on here? So he did this miracle in the presence of them in Cana. We need to talk a little bit more about this, but the Bible doesn't necessarily give a lot of information about Cana, but it's mentioned a few times. So on the third day, and the idea is it's third day from whatever was going on in John chapter 1, on the third day after this, so it seems like maybe they were down by the Jordan. It maybe took a whole day to get up north into Galilee, kind of around Nazareth, where Jesus grew up. And then there's this place called Cana. It was 3 days later, at this point, somehow, there was a wedding at Cana in Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. The interesting thing about Cana is we don't know much about it at all. We know it was a very small town. A lot of biblical scholars say it was just a few miles north of Nazareth. That's where Jesus grew up. So just a few miles north. So you could imagine maybe they had some friends there. Because they say Cana of Galilee may have only been about 400 people. That's a population, 400. So not a big place, maybe a farming community, kind of out in the middle of nowhere. The idea is that maybe people didn't even really know much about it. So when John's writing, he has to say, like if he just said Cana, people are like, Cana, where in the world's Cana? Nobody knows where Cana is. Well, you know, sometimes you may say that when you meet somebody, right? They say, well, where are you from? Well, you know, I'm from Sterling Heights, Michigan. People are like, oh, no, let me back up. Sterling Heights. And they're like, where in the world's Sterling Heights? So then you may say Michigan. Well, where's Sterling Heights? Metro Detroit, right? So they need a little bit more geographical information so they know what in the world you're talking about. So maybe this is why Cana of Galilee, whenever it's mentioned, you got to put it on the Galilee, or else people think you're making up stories or something. It's like nobody's ever heard of Cana. You know what the crazy thing is? You remember back in John chapter 1, there was that guy named Nathaniel? And you know what he said? What good thing can ever come out of Cana? No, he didn't say Cana. He said Nazareth. He said Nazareth. What good thing can come out of Nazareth? Because Nazareth was actually larger than Cana, but not by much. Maybe Nazareth was 800 to 1,000 population. Not a big place, not a big city. But you know what the crazy thing is? In John chapter 21, it says this Nathaniel dude, guess where he's from? And it's not Nazareth. He's from Cana. He's a small town boy. So Mr. Cana is saying, what good thing can come out of that bigger city than where I grew up, out of Nazareth? That was just a side point. But what I'm saying, these are very small places. And what I'm saying is when you got a small town like that, everybody knows what's going on. Like maybe almost everybody's invited to the wedding. Like everybody's friends and family. Everybody, you know, is there, and the communication would be fairly tight. People know. Back then, I'm sure people share stuff, and they may even gossip. Which becomes a very difficult thing when you're having a wedding. And especially when we find out what's going to happen during this wedding. Jesus was also invited to this wedding with his disciples. And again, this doesn't sound like it's the 12. It was maybe only 4 or 5 disciples at this point. He hadn't called everybody to follow him yet. When the wine had run out, the mother of Jesus said to him, they have no wine. So think about it. Have you ever put on a big event? Or have you ever been to a wedding where literally they run out of food? Or they run out of something to drink? Like, now in our society, it's kind of like, well, that's just not good. But we've said this many times. In the first century, this idea of what's called hospitality is of extreme importance, which means is when you invite people in, either into your house for a few days or for a few weeks or even for a meal, and certainly this would include inviting people to a wedding, that you feel desperately responsible to provide them with whatever they need. Like, for instance, Jesus tells a parable of a man who had a friend that traveled a long journey, didn't get to his house till the middle of the night. The man at the house realized, I don't have enough food. So he went to his neighbor and kept knocking on, hey, I need some help. Can you give me some food? I'm out of food. I got a friend who just came here from a long distance. I feel responsible to feed him. This is what we do in this society. We take care of people's physical needs. And now we've run out of wine. Guess what? This is shameful. This is going to be something in this small town of Cana that people are going to be talking about for a long time. Do you remember that wedding they ran? I mean, who would do that? How could that possibly happen? run out of wine during a wedding. And so this is the idea that something needed to be done. So Jesus' mother comes to Jesus and says, you got to do something. They've run out of wine. Actually, she didn't say very much, really, did she? She just said they run out of wine. She didn't say you have to do something about it. But Jesus got the idea what she's saying. So another bunch of questions come to my mind. Jesus had not done any miracles yet. Like, do you think his mother Mary is saying, well, Jesus, start doing miracles? Did she even know he was going to be doing a lot of miracles during his lifetime? Oh, just turn the water into wine. Or was she just saying, can you find us some wine? Can you do something to get us some wine? Mary knew Jesus was the Messiah, the promised one of God. She knew he was God in the flesh. I guess she knew he could do whatever he wanted to do. And she probably also knew, maybe just heard of the event, that he was just down a few days earlier at the Jordan getting baptized by John, and it was revealed to the people that he was the Messiah. So she's thinking, this is the beginning of his minute. He's starting something big now. I don't know, does Jesus need a little push? Jesus, here's a problem. I think you can fix it. Now again, whether she's thinking that he's going to go around, see if he can gather wine from all the people around, or is she really expecting a miracle? We don't really know what she had as far as the intent, but we know that Jesus' reply was, and to us sounds a little bit harsh. Jesus said, woman, what me and you, what's this problem have to do with me? Why are you asking me? What do you think I am? Do you think I don't even have a vineyard, I don't do this. This is not my job. I'm a carpenter, and the guys with me, they're fishermen. And what do we know about wine? But he did say, my hour's not come. It's not time for me to do something big. It's not time for me to show everyone my glory. My time's not yet come. And, you have to smile. Can you smile when you read some of this stuff? So, Mary doesn't hear this. She didn't hear a word he said. And like Jesus, and Mary's like, I'm done talking to you, Jesus. I'm not talking to you anymore. I'll just talk to the servants. Hey, do whatever he tells you to do. And Jesus is like, what? I was kind of saying no. And yet Mary says, he'll tell you what to do, just do it and it'll all work out. Well, that's kind of the way it went. And so now Jesus is realizing he's going to do this miracle. He's going to do something. And a lot of times, I don't think we really understand the faith of some people. We kind of overlook it. We look at all the big people of faith. But let's see what happens next. So Jesus is going to tell these servants, maybe they didn't even know who Jesus was. There are people that are maybe just working at this wedding. They're not necessarily employees, they're not contract. Maybe they are slaves, but they're servants. And this is what Jesus said. There are 6 water jars. They're very large jars for Jewish purification rites, each holding 20 to 30 gallons. And Jesus told them, fill the jars with water, and they filled them to the brim. Okay, so back then, and this may have been at the entrance of the house, it could have been somewhere else, but they have large jars of water. You remember when people come into the house, they have to cleanse themselves. And again, if you remember, Jesus was accused, why don't you wash your hands before you eat? These are the traditions and these are the rules and the laws that we've imposed as religious people. You can't eat with dirty hands. And even the utensils have to be washed. All the pots and the pans and the plates, everything's going to be washed with this water. It's not purified water. Today we take for granted. We turn on the tap and the stuff that we wash our dishes with and the stuff we wash our dog with and the stuff we water our lawn with is all the same water. It's drinkable, right? It's all been treated. But back then they didn't quite have the treatment system we have. So they either got it from a well or maybe they got it from a river. And so it's not exactly always drinkable. And that's where some people say sometimes what they did is they mixed some alcohol or some wine with the water to try to maybe kill off any impurities so you're not getting dysentery every other day, right? So this is the idea that here are these water pots for the ceremony washing. It's not drinkable necessarily. These are just water pots holding 20 to 30 gallons. And Jesus said, fill the jars with water. Okay, so you're the servants. This is going to take some work. We're talking about between 150 to 180 gallons of water. And if you only got 2 or 3 guys, that's quite a few trips back and forth to the well or back and forth to the river because they got to fill up these things. Now, I don't know about you, But if I was one of the servants, I would have thought, they're out of wine. They're not out of water. Why are we doing this? This is water. What are we going to do with the water? We're filling up all these pots. We're supposed to be getting wine, and all we're doing is wasting our time on water. Didn't seem like they had a problem. They just did what they were told. Why? Mary said, do what he tells you. So they did it. And they just didn't do it halfway. They filled them full. I mean, it would always be easier if as you're getting the water out of the river, it's wine. Wow, I can carry this back. Or maybe as you're carrying it back as water, and once you pour it in the jar, it's turning into wine. Wow, let's go get some more. This makes sense now. They just filled it up with water. Water, water, and more water. Do you think that takes a little bit of faith? Can I tell you what takes a whole lot of faith? Get your cup, Jesus says, and take it to the head waiter. Could you imagine that? It's like, what are you telling me to do? I'm going to dip this into the water, and I'm going to take it to the head waiter and say, here's the wine. I ain't doing that. You do it, buddy. Get one of the other servants to do it. Because you know what the head waiter's going to do? He's going to say, in our day, he'd say, you're fired. You're going to be disciplined. You're humiliating me in front of all these people by bringing me water and saying, this is the wine that we've got. Sometimes it takes a step of faith. And what is God calling us to do? Just like Mary said, do what he says. I don't understand it. Do what he says. It doesn't make sense. Do what he says. But we've never done it that way before. It's not the way you make wine. Do what he says. Are we willing to do that? Even in the difficult, challenging, questioning, doubting, do what he says. And so when the master of the feast tasted the water, which had now become wine, he didn't know where it came from. He thought, we're out of wine. Where do you get wine this late in the game? Where do you get the wine from? He doesn't know. But the servants knew. They knew the miracle. And it appears that no one else knew the miracle. Jesus, the servants, and the disciples, just a few disciples that were with Jesus. I don't know if this ever became a big deal. But it was a sign. And you know who it was a sign to? It was a sign to the apostles. Because that's what we read that was at the end. That Jesus did this sign, the first sign, Cana of Galilee. He did this sign, and the apostles believed. This is for their faith. It's for them to see Jesus. Jesus did an amazing thing. And yet there's something even more for us to learn as we think about this. The master of the feast called the bridegroom and said to him, everyone serves the good wine first. And the people, when they've drunk freely, then you serve the poor wine. They're not so good stuff, but you've kept the good wine until now. And so that makes sense to us, because whenever we eat or whenever we drink, right, it's always the first few bites, where we'd say our palate is very tender, it's, very receptive, you can really taste what's going on. Does that make sense? I mean, a lot of times if you went to a restaurant and you started with the entree and it was like super hot, spicy chicken with, chili pepper, right? You eat that, I can pretty well guarantee you're not tasting the rest of your meal. I don't care how good it is, right? Because you've already really attacked your palate with some very strong stuff. So you give people the good wine first and they sip and go, oh, this is the most beautiful wine I've ever tasted, right? But after you've ate and drank a lot, you can't tell the difference of much of anything. So he says, this is the best of wine. This is the good wine. This is the lesson. This is the first miracle. This is the first sign that Jesus did in Cana of Galilee, turning water to wine. Well, okay, still not quite there with the sign. That's the explanation. But did you ever think about Jesus caring for people no matter what their need is? I mean, really, don't you ever feel like, well, I've kind of got this need, but it's not that big of a need. I mean, it's like there's people in the world that are dying of starvation. There's people, that have these severe illnesses, and, it's just eating away at their body. And there's people that are suffering so much emotionally. And there's people that are mourning the death of their loved ones. And there's people that are even in the hospital now. Maybe even their friends and family can't even visit because they're in the COVID. There's all kinds of, and I got this small little problem. It's not that big of a deal. It's just like we're out of wine. It's not as big as these other problems in the world. And God's got to be so busy. Why would he even care about this? Why would he care about me? I mean, does he even notice? And by the way, I'm just in a really, really small town. I'm super insignificant. Whenever I say where I'm from, everybody kind of rolls their eyes like, where's that? Like you're like a nobody in this world. You may feel like that sometimes. I mean, a lot of people in the world. Who am I? God still knows. He still sees. He still cares. And here's the thing. Doesn't matter how smart or rich or popular. Doesn't matter how many accomplishments you've made, what people think of you. Doesn't even matter how many friends you have on Facebook. Those things are not that big of a deal. But God sees you. And he cares about you. And he's not going to overlook you. But one thing we can tell about the wedding in Cana, they ran out of wine. And if Jesus wasn't there, what would they have done? They would have had a lot of shame. They would have felt really bad. Maybe they would have felt like a failure. They would have felt like they've committed some kind of a social sin amongst the people of failing to be hospitable. So what's the answer? If you're going to have a wedding, and if you want things to go well at the wedding, you got to invite Jesus. Now, I'm not talking about just the wedding. You can invite Jesus to your wedding too. But I'm just saying to the things of your life. You got to invite Jesus in. I mean, there's people that are non-Christians. And sometimes they kind of reach out to God, in a last desperate moment. But they've never invited Jesus to the event, into their life, into this relationship, into this ceremony. They've never invited Jesus in. So we've got to invite Jesus in. The second thing we need to realize is sometimes just doing the ceremony, I'm not talking about the wedding ceremony, I'm talking about these religious vessels that they use to purify. That was kind of a religious system. And sometimes the religious system, just going through the motions, it doesn't work. What has to happen when we've invited Jesus into the wedding, we have to take maybe what's inside the religious system, just the stuff we've been doing, maybe out of habit, right? Just maybe out of ritual. We just come to church every Sunday morning. That's what we do. But if that's all it is, just following religious rules and regulations, hey, there's no life. You know what you've got? Just some regular undrinkable water. But if you allow Jesus to come in, it turns to wine. A miracle can be done so that you are now useful, not only to God, but to others. And people value you because of who you are, because of Christ, not because of yourself. So God works, God does a miracle, and we become something that we could never be on our own. That water was not going to turn itself to wine. But Jesus, the power of God, changes us into something and transforms us into something that is pure, something that blesses people, something that tastes great, something that the world needs. They need Jesus. And we can take something very common, like these stone water jars, in the hands of Jesus. They become what the people need. The third thing we see is that Jesus transforms from the inside out. So we invite Jesus into our life. He changes, he transforms our heart, and then we can be a blessing to other people. But as long as we keep Jesus out, because unlike the water, we have free will. We can choose. We can accept him in or not. We can be transformed or we can reject that. So we have to be people that are open to say, Lord, use me. Lord, open my heart. Lord, make me into the person that you want me to be. There's another verse that's very similar that Paul uses as he talks about this, 2 Corinthians chapter 4 and verse 7. We have this treasure in jars of clay. So almost think about the wedding jar. We have a treasure in the jars of clay to show that the all-surpassing power is from God and not from us. So Paul says, yeah, I'm like the clay pot. I'm just a vessel. I mean, I kind of on the outside look like everybody else. But inside there's something that's happening. Transforming power that God is working, all-surpassing power, Paul calls it, beyond reason, beyond measure, beyond understanding. God's going to work in us so that we can be a blessing to other people. In 2 Kings chapter 4, there we've got the story of Elisha. He went to the widow's house and she had no oil. And Elisha said, go and collect water pots. Go and collect all the pots you can get. What happened is the oil kept flowing, kept building, and kept overflowing in these pots. And then eventually Elisha said, well, get some more. No, these are all the pots. We've gathered all the pots that we can get. They're all filled with olive oil. And Elisha said, use this to pay your debtors, and the rest you can live on. Kind of sounds like the power of God. Kind of sounds like what's happening here. Because somehow if you do the math out of these water vessels, we're talking about 150 to 180 gallons of wine. Now, does anybody think that's a lot of wine for a small town? I don't think the wedding was that big. Small town. It sounds like this could almost be like an Elisha moment. There is enough here for everybody, and there's enough for the couple. Maybe enough wine to last for another year or two. Or maybe they could even sell it and have some extra money for their life. This is what we learn from Elisha, though, that this transforming power of multiplication and God providing not only fixes our past. God's power not only cleanses our past, forgives the past, reconciles the past, blesses the past. But hey, there's enough here for you to live on, for your future, for the coming days. And that's what we look for God to continue to work in our life. Today we think about the power of God's ability to change us, to transform us, to make us into something and someone that we can never be on ourselves. No one else can help us to become that. But God gives us the invitation that we could participate, we could partake, we could be blessed by the presence of Jesus. So that just involves two things. One, invite Jesus to the wedding. Invite Jesus into your life. Invite Jesus to do his work inside of you. What else would I need to do? Listen to what Mary said. She said one thing. Do what he says. That's it. Invite him in, do what he says. And if we can help you make that decision, if today you're ready to surrender your life to Christ, to give everything over to him, to repent of your sins and to confess the name of Christ, to be baptized so that your water in your life, it's undrinkable, pretty well unusable. I mean, people wash their hands in it. But your life can be transformed when you obey what Jesus has said. If we can bless you, let's stand. We'll sing this song.